Mark, lesson 5a, chapter 8. So toggling off of 7, we left off, verse 31 tells us that he was in the Decapolis. So again, he went from the region of Tyre and came through Sidon and the Sea of Galilee within the region of Decapolis. And they brought him one who was deaf and spoke with difficulty, and they implored him to lay his hands on him. And Jesus took him aside from the crowd by himself and put his fingers into his ears. And after spitting, he touched his tongue with the saliva. And looking up to heaven with a deep sigh, he said to them, Epaphatha, that is, be opened. And his ears were opened, and the impediment of his tongue was removed. And he began speaking plainly. And he gave them, let's see, he gave them orders not to tell anyone, but the more he ordered them, the more widely they continued to proclaim it. They were utterly astonished, saying, he has done all things well. He makes even the deaf to hear and the mute to speak. So that was our chapter theme for last time. Jesus, a prophet who has done all things well. So heading in to Mark 8, he says, in those days, in what days? In the days that he was in the Decapolis. So if you're following the literary flow, you're like, in what days? In the days that he was in the Decapolis. So there's your geography. As we move forward, so you're kind of tracking your geography changes. If you see, I have those in green. Anytime we change geography, I do a little green mark. And what we're looking at is first to the Jew and then to the Gentiles. Whenever we're getting into this next one with the feeding of the 4,000, well, where is he feeding the 4,000? Where did he feed the 5,000? Who were they? What does this represent? Um, so your feeding of the 5,000 was representative of the Jews, and that was represented in the 12 baskets. And then your Gentiles are represented here. So we're going to look at those differences in a minute, but he's in the area of the Decapolis. So in those days, when there was a large crowd and they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples and said to them, I feel compassion for the people because they have remained with me now for 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way, and some of them have come from a great distance. And his disciples answered him, where will anyone be able to find enough bread here in this desolate place to satisfy these people? And he was asking them, how many loaves do you have? And they said, 7. And he directed the people to sit down on the ground, and taking the 7 loaves, he gave thanks and broke them and started giving them to his disciples to serve them. And they served them to the people. They also had a few small fish, and after he had blessed them, he ordered these to be served as well. And they ate and were satisfied, and they picked up 7 large baskets full of what was left over of the broken pieces. About 4,000 were there, and he sent them away. Okay, so this seven is number of perfection and completion. And you see in Revelation that the 7 churches. So the 7 churches represented the church as a whole. So yes, Jesus was writing or dictating letters to the 7 churches who are in Asia, but that number 7 represents the church for all the ages as a whole. So here you see the Gentiles represented in those 7 baskets. and we're starting to get this going back and forth between the geography, first to the Jew, then to the Gentile. The first feeding represented the feeding of the Jews, um, and then the second feeding represents the feeding to the Gentiles, first to the Jew, then to the Gentile. Whenever you study um Luke and Acts together, you see it's first in Jerusalem and then to Judea and then to all, and then out to Asia and then to the rest of the world. You like see this progression. Um, and so what we're getting into here is, guys, what
Jennifer,
yes?
can sorry, can I can't I see a white screen. Does anybody else see a white screen? No, just me. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, weird. Okay. Um, sorry about that. Hopefully it records right. All right, so what we're seeing here, and it's he's gonna start talking about it. It's, guys, it's not what you think. What you think is gonna happen is no, there's a whole different thing going on here, and he's got to get their minds there. And we're gonna see that in chapter 8. So in chapter 7, or before, um, was it in 7? No, in 7 he was talking about what could defile a man. I think it was before in 6.
I want to go off. Hey, Holly, that happened to me a couple weeks ago. I logged off and logged back, and it popped on. It sort of like rebooted.
Maybe that's where she is. Um, so yeah, with the feeding, and he is like, they had just come off of this, he had just sent them out. He gave them all the authority to do all these things, to cast out demons and to heal and things like that. And that first feeding, and he says, you give them something to eat, you feed them. And you know they didn't do it. They were like, well, where are we supposed to get it? We don't have this and all that stuff. So he ended up feeding the crowd. And then we have where we're kind of see, like, it talks about like a hardness of heart um going on. And then we talked about how he walked on water in front of them. um and so here we are in 7, and he's explaining some things to them. We have the what can defile a man, and what can't, and things like that. And then we get down into 8, and you know where will we find the bread after all of that? They're still kind of like just not there, but we see Jesus's patience. And by the end of this, we're going to get to a confession from Peter, as well, and things are going to start turning whenever we get into chapter 9. So what we're seeing is this lack of understanding going on, kind of like this hardness. Not really a It's not a hardness of heart like Pharaoh. It's kind of like a different kind of hardness, and he nails it when he asks them, do you not yet see or understand? um so That's what we're seeing here. They're just not yet seeing, and they're not yet understanding. They're expecting something else. And I'm kind of, I one of the questions I kind of started having in my mind was it confusing to them, him toggling between, like, they would go into Jewish territory, but then they would go into Gentile territory. And I kind of started wondering if that was kind of a little bit like, they were like, kind of, what's going on? We don't understand this. Um, that was just kind of one of the things I thought. That's my own thinking. Um, you know, I don't know, what did you guys, what are some of the thoughts that you had doing this week?
Well, I think partly similar to what you said, and knowing that, Jesus was primarily there for the Jews, but that it was such a huge step for them to go into this new administration,
Mm-hmm.
that God couldn't like just do the Jews and then all of a sudden pop the Gentiles on them all at once. He kind of had to bring it in, and they needed some coaching with it. So yeah, I think I would kind of along the same lines. It's like they needed the coaching, and it probably did just really throw them for a loop. Um, like, did you really mean that? I mean, is that really who we're letting in?
Do what? Yeah. So I think, I started thinking, Abraham, through you, all nations will be blessed. Um, and we saw throughout history and throughout the Old Testament, um, Ruth. Ruth was a Moabite, and she married a Jewish man, and she followed uh uh Naomi's God. And she ended up marrying Boaz, and she was in the genealogy of Jesus. Who else? Rahab, the prostitute. She hid the spies, and then she married in to Israel, and she, was in the genealogy of Jesus. She had that belief in God. And so they called them, I think they called them proselytes or something like that. But there were people outside of the Jewish nation that followed the one true living God. Um, now, did those people in those whole nations? No. Um, I remember studying Egyptian history, and there was a king, I think his name was Aten, and he was convinced that there was only one God, and he could not convince the priests. And I forgot, there's a whole story behind it. But he was wanting those priests to follow the one true living God, and they just wouldn't. Um, Same with was it Genghis Khan, and Marco Polo almost had him converted. Anyway, that's a whole thing. But when you look throughout the Bible, there were people outside of the Jewish nation or outside of Israel that followed the one true living God. Some of them would marry into Israel and become part of that Jewish nation. We see some of those accounts. What I'm One of the things I'm thinking, and one of the things I'm wondering, is if here we are in the Roman Empire, and the whole leadership is just corrupt and off base, and there's this, yes, there is a distinction between Jew and Gentile in the Bible, but it seems like it's at such a point that they've forgotten through you, all nations will be blessed. Through you, Abraham, all nations will be blessed. And so it just kind of shakes. I mean, everything is different about what they thought. We're gonna see here at the end in what they're thinking, and what's the whole problem here. Um, if you look at Jesus's birth, like Matthew, Luke, Matthew is presenting, here is the king, here is the king, here is the king. And that's what Herod's upset about. They've been told, oh, King of the Jews was born. And then he decides to kill all the baby boy. This is Herod the first. And then, you know, you have your Pharisees and Sadducees. You see their hardness of heart, and they're not accepting Messiah, even though they should know that this is the time of Messiah. Like, I don't know if you guys read Matthew at all this week, where Jesus says, when it talks about the sign, they're wanting a sign. And he's like, you can tell this and you can tell that, but you can't tell the signs of the times. They should have known from Daniel, that now was the time. So, um, what was the Pharisees and Sadducees' problem? Why weren't they accepting Messiah? Well, politics, basically, was at the crux of it. That's kind of it really hit me this week with a lot of this. I really think that this chapter is speaks to today. It's like, what are our minds on? Are they on the things of God, or are they on the things of man? So back to the feeding of the 4,000, and just kind of looking at where they are, where we'll be able to find food, even though he's done this before. And then he feeds the people, which represents the Gentiles. Anything else on here in these first 9 verses? So your paragraph theme, Jesus feeds the 4,000, pretty simple. So your Decapolis, so was 10 cities, Gentile territory. In my notes, I do have a couple of articles I did pull, from Got Questions. I also went to That the World May Know by Ray Vander Laan. So I have an article explaining what the Decapolis is, and couple of other things I'll talk about at the end. So, and immediately he entered the boat with his disciples and came to the district of Dalmanutha, and the Pharisees came out and began to argue with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven to test him. Sighing deeply in his spirit, he said, "Why does this generation seek for a sign? Truly I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation." Leaving them, he again embarked and went away to the other side. Well, first of all, anybody do a word study on generation? So I've done this before with Matthew, and a few things come up. Um, let's see, where is it? Was it somewhere else? I can't find it. I can't find the word study now, but usually a few things come up with that generation. It can mean literally that generation. It can mean nation, but the other thing that it can mean is what I would call times and epochs. So what we're looking at here is here he is, first coming. This generation of Jews, they're seeking for a sign. This generation that's going to reject him. We're going to have another generation in just a little bit. And that's going to speak more to times and epochs. So you kind of have to watch literary flow and what he's saying to kind of figure this out a little bit. But here he's talking about this generation of Jews. This generation seeks for a sign. Truly, I say to you that no sign will be given to this generation. Leaving them again, he embarked and went to the other side. So whenever you did your cross-referencing, there was a little more to it. What did he say? He said he would give him the sign of Jonah. So, and that was in Matthew. So this 10 through 13, the Pharisees demand a sign from heaven. So that just shows their hardness of heart and unbelief. And they had forgotten to take bread and did not have more than one loaf in the boat with them. And he was giving orders to them, saying, "Watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod." They began discussing with one another the fact that they had no bread. And Jesus, aware of this, said to them, "Why do you discuss the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet see or understand? Do you have a hardened heart? Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, and how many baskets full of broken pieces you picked up?" And they said to him, 12. "When I broke the 7 for the 4,000, how many large baskets full of broken pieces did you pick up?" And they said to him, 7. And he was saying to them, "Do you not yet understand?" So, what is the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod? And Matthew brings in the leaven of the Sadducees. So, what is all that?
Their unbelief.
Yeah. Yeah, the teaching of unbelief. And these guys, they had some teachings that they were teaching people. So yes, it was the leaven of unbelief. Leaven was a symbol of sin in the Bible. I think there's one place where it's a symbol of something else, but for the most part, leaven is a symbol of sin. And so their sin was unbelief. But because of their unbelief, they were also teaching the people different things. So the Pharisees were saying that he was doing his miracles by the power of Beelzebub. The Sadducees were saying that he was against the temple ministry. The Herodians were saying that he opposed Roman rule through Herod. So they were kind of like teaching the people different things about him, false teaching. And in fact, Matthew 16 through 12 says that it talks about how that they were talking about, he was talking about what they were teaching. So out of their unbelief, they were teaching false things about him. So that's why he's saying, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, and the leaven of Herod. So, yeah, and I was actually talking with Joe about this. I was like, this is so pervasive today that people, he actually kind of made a neat analogy of, he was like, I always thought of the leaven as, how it just kind of like puffs up, um, like the yeast like makes the bread all puffy and fluffy, and how these guys were just like really puffed up with themselves. And I was like, well, I was like, you're not far off. I was like, they were. And Paul talks about that. He talks about false teachers and how basically the root of it is their pride, and they're puffed up with themselves and their own thoughts and whatever, and the whole thing is them wanting the attention on themselves instead of the attention where it should be, and the attention should be on God and Christ. So these guys were all, just they're not on the things of God at all. These guys are obviously on things of the world. These guys think they're on the things of God. They're not. In politics was involved in here as well. Because that would have been a real problem for them. To say, yeah, there's the king is here. That would have been a real political problem. So, he was warning them to beware of their teachings. And then we see him asking, do you not yet see or understand? Do you have a hardened heart? Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And then he, takes them back memory lane with the feeding of the 5,000 and feeding of the 4,000. He says, do you not yet understand? So we see Jesus here gently, like, trying to get them to put the pieces together. He's warning them, but also, okay, let's start putting the pieces together. So, what would be a good paragraph title for this?
The disciples still don't see and understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so now we get a picture. So they came to Bethsaida, and they brought a blind man to Jesus and implored him to touch him. And taking the blind man by the hand, he brought him out of the village, and after spitting on his eyes and laying his hands on him, he asked him, do you see anything? And he looked up and he said, I see men, for I see them like trees walking around. Then again he laid his hands on his eyes, and he looked intently and was restored and began to see everything clearly. And he sent him home, saying, do not even enter the village. All right, what just happened here?
Is it kind of like um it's kind of, I don't know, twofold, like spiritual clarity or something, or like he's showing them they don't understand, and he's showing them by healing a blind man, like they're blind.
Yeah.
Is that kind of,
But are they always going to be blind?
they might have times of blindness. I don't know.
Yeah, he's showing. So this is like whenever we studied Ezekiel, how God would have Ezekiel like act things out. So this is kind of like an acted out parable.
That, I guess that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, where it's like he's showing, because this is a one of a kind. Like he hasn't done this before. Like usually he heals, bam, it's done. But this time he did it in two stages. And it was a picture of what's going on. Like, yeah, you guys aren't getting it. You're not seeing, you're not understanding. Everything's really fuzzy. And then everything's going to be really clear. He's acting that out for them. Do you not see? Do you not understand? And so his next miracle is acting this out. So pretty neat. Um, so paragraph theme, Jesus heals a blind man deliberately by increments. So next, Jesus went out along with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way, he questioned his disciples, saying to them, "Who do people say that I am?" And they told him, saying, "John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, but others say of the prophets." Let me read from my actual paper. Oh, but the other is one of the prophets. And he continued by questioning them, "But who do you say that I am?" And Peter answered and said to him, "You are the Christ." And he warned them to tell no one about him. All right. Here's the big one. So first of all, did anybody do any research on Caesarea Philippi? Only me. Um, so Caesarea Philippi, who they had this place, RVL talks about it. And so I did pull an article about Canaan worship that mentions it. He has some videos on it, but you have to pay to access them. So Caesarea Philippi, there was a place there that it was, they actually called it the gates of hell. And it was like this cave or whatever that the river sprung out of. And they said that it was like the opening to the underworld. And they would worship Pan and the god Dionysus there. And really bad things would go on there. So whenever you look at Matthew's account of that, whenever he says, "And the gates of hell would not prevail," it kind of gives it more meaning, because he's actually at the place where those things, that where there was that geography and that yucky worship was going on, and things like that. um so she did have us go and look at Matthew. And there's my comparison. Now, when Jesus came into the region of Caesarea Philippi, he was taking his disciples. "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the other prophets." And he said to them, "But who do you yourselves say that I am?" And Simon Peter answered, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus said to him, "Blessed are you, Simon Barjona, because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I also say to you that you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overpower it. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall have been bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall have been loosed in heaven." And then he gave the disciples strict orders that they were to tell no one that he was the Christ. All right. So, what did you find out? What's some of the research you did into some of this as far as what the things you learned more in Matthew?
That he had received revelation from God, that Christ was the Christ.
Yep. Yeah. Flesh and blood did not tell you this. What else? Anything else? So they were at Caesarea Philippi, and we talked about uh the geography there and what was going on there. So it was revealed to him by the Father who is in heaven to Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. So what is, when he's talking about this, upon this rock I will build my church, what is he talking about? Upon what rock? What is the rock?
Well, I think that goes back to the revelation, the new birth, and the believers having revelation available to them all the time. I don't think it was Peter, I guess it was indicative of what Peter did, which was got revelation directly from God.
Yeah, well, Revelation, it's the confession, it's the belief. Upon this rock, I believe in Christ. Upon this rock I will build my church. Everyone who comes into the church has to confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. It's upon this confession, upon this belief, I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overpower it. So we see in Revelation, death and Hades is done away with. Um, so it's upon this rock I will build my church. Um, and then I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall have been bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall have been loosed in heaven. So did anybody do any research in binding and loosing? So binding and loosing was a legal term. Um, and the important thing to know is that God was not just giving Peter or the apostles the authority to just do whatever. Um, it was the authority to these things had already been uh bound in heaven or loosed in heaven. So it was all in accordance with God. It wasn't just that Peter could just make up whatever. This was all in accordance with God and his precepts and his standards. It was already loosed in heaven and bound in heaven. So that's really important to note here, because this can kind of go awry with some things. So it's really important to note here that that rock is that belief and that confession in Christ. Upon this rock, I will build my church. Jesus is the rock. The gates of Hades will not overpower it. And that binding and loosing, that legal term, it's what has been bound in heaven and what has been loosed in heaven. It's not just whatever we come up with, it's what God says. So anything else on this part? On Peter's confession?
I think this moment must have made Jesus really happy
Yeah.
because he was finally getting through to at least one of them.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Um, well, and it's kind of, I mean, it's kind of interesting because it's like, okay, we've been through all this. We had the feeding of the 5,000. You guys didn't, I said, hey, you feed them. They didn't feed them. And then it's like, well, he walked on water. And when you go into other accounts, it's like Peter, he got out of the boat, he walked on water, and then he became afraid and he started sinking. And then we have, this feeding of the 4,000, and there was just no trying there. And he's like, do you guys still, and he's telling them, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. Do you still not see? Do you still not understand? And then we have this acting out of this parable in this healing, and then we see Peter's confession, and it's like, whew, we're there. So we just see um this progression and the patience and all the things that just that walk. Like, God's not going to leave you, he's not going to forsake you, he's going to walk with you until you come to that understanding, till you come to that confession. He's like, God revealed this to you. But yeah, I mean, he must have been so happy. So, but what does he go into next immediately? Peter has his confession, but then what does he start talking to him about?
his death and what's coming up.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like Peter confesses you are the Christ, but then what's going to happen? So we're starting a new segment division. And so from here on out, we've had the part of his ministry where he's like toggling back, back and forth between Jewish territory and Gentile territory, first to the Jew, then to the Gentile, but now we're on the road to Jerusalem. So, and he began to teach them. So, like, all this time, he's been teaching, them, and now he's going to teach them this. Now that we've had this confession, okay, now we're getting to this. And he's going to start teaching them they're, this is what's going to happen to me, but then this is, you're going to have a role in this too. So 31, and began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he was stating the matter plainly, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning around and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on God's interest, but man's. Okay, so he just had this confession by Peter, and then we see Peter is rebuking Jesus, and then Jesus is saying, get behind me, Satan. What happened here?
Well, I think even though Peter understood that he was the Christ, he still didn't understand the whole picture. Because like you had said before, like there were a lot of Old Testament teachings that pointed to everything that was going on and going to be happening in this new administration,
Mm-hmm.
but they sort of forgotten about them, dismissed them, whatever. So again, I mean, the Old Testament teaches that Christ was going to come and he was going to die, but yet Peter is like, you know, no, 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 no. So Jesus Christ comes back and says, you know, get thee behind me.
Yeah. Yeah. So, um, I like this little clip art picture, um, with the crown and the cross because Peter had his mind on earthly things. And so in their mind, Messiah was going to come and establish his kingdom. And so for Jesus to say, I'm gonna, I'm gonna be killed, they're gonna reject me and then they're gonna kill me. Peter's like, no, 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 no. This is not how it's gonna happen. He starts rebuking him. And then Jesus rebukes him and says, get behind me, Satan, you're setting your mind on God's interests. Um, or you're not setting your mind on God's interest, but man's. So they're thinking this is kind of jumbling them up because they really were expecting him to come and set up his kingdom. But Gloria, like you said, I mean, it's replete throughout the Old Testament. We can definitely see it now. First coming and second coming, what was supposed to happen with the first coming, and then what's going to happen with the second coming. So I mean, this first part, I mean, he's the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. John the Baptist said that. John the Baptist understood that. Um, so here he is saying, you know, I have to do this part. And then we're going to get down to the part that you guys are going to have to do. So, this one hit me really hard. This 33. Um, you're setting your mind on, or you are not setting your mind on God's interests, but man's. And I just keep asking myself, what are we doing? What are we all doing? Um, I think if we just, this verse right here, and if we started looking at God's interests and God's timeline and what he's doing here, here in 2025, what are his interests and what are man's interests? I think it would just change a lot of things. Maybe a lot of people would be quiet. But that one hit me. I was just like, what are we doing? Um, so I think whenever we set our mind on God's interests, um, a lot of peace comes where a lot of things that are going on in the world don't really affect you or worry you so much. I think that whenever you have God's interests in mind, you realize what's going on and what he's doing, and there's just a certain peace, and the things of this world just don't really um, throw you off kilter so much. So I think that this could be a good one, a good key verse for us. Um, so was Jesus really calling Peter Satan?
I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to ask you that. Because he turned around, so wouldn't that mean Peter would be behind him then? So then he's talking to the rest of the disciples. So he was not really talking to Peter directly, but the rest of the disciples. I'm not.
Um, Well, it says, but so Peter takes him aside and he's saying, takes him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning around and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter, and said, "Get behind me, Satan." So it really, what I'm seeing is Peter takes him away and he's rebuking him. He turns around and he sees his disciples and he rebukes Peter, in front of the disciples. And he said, "Get behind me, Satan." So why is he really calling Peter Satan? Or is somebody influencing Peter to rebuke him? What was that?
Yeah, I'm looking at Bullinger to see if he's got anything on that. Let's see.
Could it be something around more that it isn't Peter himself that he's referencing as Satan, but his thinking, because it's influenced by Satan?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the last thing Satan wants is for Jesus to go to the cross. So this is an example of Peter just had this confession. It was revealed to him by God that Jesus is the Christ, that he is the Messiah, he is the anointed one. And next thing you know, and Peter, I mean, yeah, he doesn't want him to die. He's like, "What are you talking about? No, and he's rebuking him, but Jesus is saying you're not setting your mind on God's interest but man's, because he has to go to the cross. Satan doesn't want Jesus to go to the cross.
But at this time, doesn't he want him to go? Because he's the one who incited the crowds and he didn't know about the mystery. It wasn't until the mystery was revealed that then Satan's like, holy mackerel, what did I do? Now I got thousands of them running around. Up until that point,
Yeah,
he's just,
but he incited Herod to kill all the baby boys because he didn't even want Messiah on the planet.
well, that's what I mean. So, I mean, the devil didn't want, even at this time, I think until the mystery was revealed. So Acts chapter 2, verse 4. Then I think we get into where the devil is like regretting what he did. But up until this point, he's trying to kill Christ.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but also yes, I understand.
I think all of 8 is not only confusing and I don't necessarily say it's contradicting. I think there's a lot more in here that we're missing. I know I am personally.
Okay. Well, let's discuss it.
It's a
What are we
lot.
missing?
Oh my gosh. Well, there's so many things I start to take literally, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, no, that doesn't really mean that. This means something else. I think where I got it was, even with the blind man, I mean, he's seeing trees. That has to be symbolic of something. Just not that he went in segments or he went in stages,
Mm-hmm.
but I am thinking that there's just so much more in here. So what did it mean that he was seeing trees moving? I think that's something else.
I mean, that's an interesting point, I think, because there are a lot of references to Jesus Christ being the vine and the branches and that whole thing. So
Right.
maybe,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I didn't do word studies. I wished I had, because now all this is going up here and I'm sort of right now my worst enemy because I'm overthinking all of this right now.
So there is something, I need to find it. Ray Vanderlaan actually did a video about the trees. Um, and yeah, I mean, you're looking at this, was this guy always blind? Because well, how would he know what looked like trees? So I mean, you could just keep asking questions and keep asking questions and keep asking questions. I can try to find the RVL video. Joe might know because we watched it, which one it is, but I think it's in his discipleship one. So I can pull that out and bring that in next time, the information from that with the trees. We're actually going to go back to 8 whenever we get into 9. So we're actually going to start a timeline next time and things like that. So I can pull that information and toggle back to here.
And there's another one that it sort of get me going here too, and that's on 30. Well, 29 and 30, and he warns them not to tell no one about him.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, why? And I'm noticing all through Mark, he's constantly telling them, don't tell anybody about me. Don't tell anybody about me. And when I healed somebody, don't reveal that to anybody. And now we have it here again. So I'm thinking that these are connecting the dots somewhere.
Yeah. So it wasn't his time yet. It wasn't the time for him to be crucified. So you see, there's times where usually it's with the Jews, don't tell, but with the Gentiles, tell. So those are things that we can go back and track with our geography. Who is he telling not to tell, and who is he telling to tell, and why? And a lot of it has to do with these guys following him around. Where are they? Yes. The Pharisees and the scribes and the Sadducees. We see in Matthew as the Sadducees too. So it has to do with that. Back to get thee behind me, Satan. So Satan knows scripture. And yes, he was trying to so he didn't want Messiah to come. He tried to kill him, but he really didn't want him to go to the cross and to redeem man. And he really doesn't want him to come a second time either, because then he knows he's done. So this is what's going on here. Now we can do a little more work on it and toggle back in to 8. We're on the road to Jerusalem. So we can come in and we can do some cross references and we can build on this. But the main thing is for this get me behind me Satan is anytime that we don't set our mind on things of God, but things of man, who is influencing us? This person. So he wasn't, whenever he rebuked Peter, he wasn't necessarily calling Peter Satan. He was addressing the influence behind Peter's rebuke. So anything else? We've got trees, we've got Satan, we've got tell, don't tell. I'm making a list of things that we can cover in depth and do more cross-referencing on next time. Anything else that's confusing? And trees. Okay, I've got a list. Um, paragraph 31 through 33, then Jesus began to teach them he is a son of man and must be killed. So just I'm going to go back to that little graphic. They're thinking that, you know, it's Christ, he's anointed one, he's Messiah. They've forgotten about what must happen in the first coming, and they're ready for this. They're under Rome, and that was not good, and things were happening that weren't good. So yeah, this would have been relief, just like today. Today it would be a total relief if he were to come. Well, yeah, it would be, because the next thing we're looking for is a rapture. But and then, he'll come back in the seventh bowl, which we're about to get to. And then he will rule and reign for 1,000 years physically on the earth. But this was what their thinking was. They were forgetting about this part that needed to happen, the disciples. But then he starts telling them, well, this is what I have to do. Now this is what you need to do. And he summoned the crowd with his disciples and said to them, if anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel will save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what will a man give in exchange for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will also be ashamed of him when he comes in the glory of his Father and with his holy angels. So, what did you guys find out? Did you do any word studies? Anyone doing on a cross? So I looked it up, and it was, I mean, one of the definitions, it was definitely the Roman means of execution. Um, so must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. So alluding to the type of death he would have, but must deny himself. And then whoever wishes to save his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospels will save it. So what's he talking about here? What's he trying to show him?
Like a new way of thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like, I'm going to be killed. I'm going to be rejected by the elders and the chief priests, and I'm going to be killed, but then I'm going to rise again in 3 days. But what must you do?
Sort of stop looking to ourselves, and take up his cross and follow him.
Mm-hmm.
And then later tells us not to be ashamed of him.
Yeah. And so, for whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will also be ashamed of him when he comes in the glory of his Father and his holy angels. So when does he come in glory with his holy angels?
Judgment Day?
Yeah, we call it, well, yeah, I mean, we call it Judgment Day, but in the seventh bowl for the Battle of Armageddon. And so he comes at the end of the tribulation. And that's when, so we have first coming and we have second coming. Second coming is when he comes in glory, the glory of his Father with his holy angels. So the second coming is at the seventh bowl. So first coming and second coming. And then when you look
You
at
said seventh, what? Seventh.
in the seventh bowl,
All right. Now, does the seven have connection with the seven loaves, the bread, and the seven churches?
well, seven is a number of perfection and completion.
Is
So
it anything to do with these? This is the first time that I'm seeing where he references holy angels.
mhm.
Is there something with that too?
So if you go down to Revelation 19:11, and I don't know, I need to look ahead in Mark 13 because there's something in Matthew 24, and I don't know if Matthew 24 and Mark 13 are synoptic. So I think that's going to pick it up again. I need to make sure though before I say anything. So Revelation 19:11 through 15. And I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it is called Faithful and True. And in righteousness he judges and wages war. His eyes are a flame of fire, and his head, and on his head are many crowns, and he has a name written on him which no one knows except himself. He is clothed in a robe dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of God. And the armies which are in heaven, clothed in fine linen, white and clean, were following him on white horses. And from his mouth comes a sharp sword, so that with it he may strike down the nations, and he will rule them with a rod of iron, and he treads the winepress of the fierce wrath of God the Almighty. So you see Mark 8:38, when he comes in the glory of his Father with his holy angels. Matthew 16:27, for the Son of Man is going to come in the glory of his Father and with his angels, and will then repay every person according to his deeds. Proverbs 24, he was quoting Proverbs 24:12, says, if you say, see, we did not know this, does he who weighs the hearts not consider it? And does he who not watches over your soul not know it? And will he not repay a person according to his work? So Revelation 19, that's in your seventh bowl, is whenever he comes with the armies which are in heaven. And then Revelation 22:12 tells us, behold, he says to him, I'm coming quickly, and my reward is with me to render to every man according to what he has done. So that toggles up to Matthew 16:27. So Matthew gives us a little more information. That's why I pulled in that 19:11. So we do have, this has started us out into some end time stuff, and we're going to have some more when we hit Mark 13. We're going to have some more next week in Mark 9. So that's what I'm saying. We're going to start a timeline here. But just in this right here, we have this new segment division. We're on the road to Jerusalem. And he's talking about what we know had to happen in his first coming. And Gloria, like you said, it was replete throughout the Old Testament. But then we have this whole other part of when he starts talking about second coming. But there's this part in between his first coming and what he did for us on the cross, He's saying that this is going to have to happen to me. And there's this whole other part in between when he comes um, in the glory of it, in the glory of his Father and with his holy angels, which we now call the second coming. So, what's the part in between? What's the part in between the cross and I'm going to just say millennial kingdom? Cross and millennial kingdom. What's the part in between?
The resurrection, the age of grace, us.
Yeah, so that the after the resurrection, he's with them for 40 days. And then he tells them, hey, stay in Jerusalem for 10 days and wait for the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit was given, we call it Pentecost. So 10 days later, the Holy Spirit fell and was given, and the church age was born. We call it the age of grace. So this is what he's alluding to in this generation, this time, this epic. So whenever you're looking at the word generation, there's about three different definitions, and you're having to look at literary flow, but he's introducing what we call the church age. And you guys are going to have to take up your cross and follow me. And whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will also be ashamed of him when he comes in the glory of his Father and his holy angels. So is what he's introducing to them is what they're going, like, what's next for you. So he's been here, he's had his ministry, and he's been teaching them. We've been seeing all of this is what we've been studying. And now we get to Peter's confession of you are the Christ. And then we get to this next part of, okay, this is what's going to happen to me. And then he's starting to introduce them to what's next. Because they're going to be given that mission. So you see, Mark, we talked about boom, 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 how Mark was written to the church in Rome, and how Romans were very like mission oriented. And so Mark's been talking about Jesus's mission this whole time. And so we see that his mission of ministry, now his mission to get to the cross, and then the commissioning of the disciples. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Any confusion? Okay, so we have a few things to look at. And I think while we're looking at who did he tell to tell and who did he tell don't tell, we can just go ahead and put that up on some type of maybe even segment division chart of Jew and Gentile by geography. We can track, maybe we should start some of our segment divisions, getting those in place. Maybe the road to Jerusalem. I'll look up that tree thing, that tree video, because there was something to that. And then we'll get a timeline started with first coming, second coming, because Mark 9 mentioned some stuff. And then probably do a little work on that Get Thee Behind Me, Satan. And what else?
I can't think of anything, but I wanted to add on to, do we know the blind man? Was he a Gentile or was he a Jew? Because it doesn't say it. And back I think it was last week's, when the lady brought in her daughter and Jesus referenced about the dogs, the breadcrumbs and all that.
Hmm.
Was she a Gentile or a Jew?
She was a Gentile.
She was a Gentile. And did he tell her not to say anything? I don't think
Um,
he did. So that's why I'm so confused on those. Maybe he did and I missed that. But then with this gentleman, he took him out of the village and then he sent him home and said, do not go back into the village, no matter what. So I wonder if there was something in that. I mean, it was in, I just put it away. Shouldn't have done
well,
that.
honestly, I would go back and look at, like, I'm looking right here. Um, the Pharisees came out and began to argue with them. Did he say that because the Pharisees were in town, in the village?
Okay. So,
So, because that's something to start looking at. Like, if we're going to go back and we're going to look at who did he say tell and who did he say don't tell, and look at geography. And yes, the blind man was a Gentile. All the geography is in the Gentile region on this, but then also what's going on with the Pharisees and the scribes? Where are they? And maybe they're like, I'm looking at this, and I think one of the reasons he said no, don't go into the village was because of that. I could be totally wrong. But it's something to look at. Like, where were they? Um, so I know that happened a lot whenever we were studying Luke and Acts. So they were always following around. But anything else? There is that it's called Yeshua, the Life of Messiah from a Messianic Jewish perspective, by Arnold G. Fruchtenbaum. I had given you guys the links a long time ago. I don't look at it every week. I did a little catch up work this week. That he does have some pretty good stuff about binding and loosing, and the kingdom, like kind of like the 5 different parts of the kingdom, as far as the spiritual part, the physical part, things like that. Um, he's done some work on that. His opinion is that the blasphemy of the Holy Spirit is not a sin that can be uh, reproduced, so to speak. He's kind of toggling that to the Jewish leaders, or the Jewish religious leaders at the time, rejecting Christ, that sinful, adulterous generation. So he's kind of toggling it to that, and he kind of has some arguments about that if you want to go read about that. Just some really kind of interesting historical things in there. I did look at it this time, and that's what I've been using. I've also been using Ray Vander Laan's That the World May Know. He has some articles there. And you can actually go in and you can search and type in something, and it will, all the videos or whatever will pop up that have it in there, and then you can either rent the video or pay for the video or whatever. And then always got questions, and you'll see in my notes that I have some things in here. This one, That the World May Know, it's on the cults of Canaan, but it does mention that oh gosh, uh the gates of hell and pan worship and things like that. um have got questions, binding and loosing, just a simple explanation, and then also an article in The World May Know about the Decapolis, so that gives kind of a little more information about that.